Hello everybody and welcome back, where today we're talking about Mixture, a PSVR2 game that comes in at around £24, I think, around that area, and comes out in 2 days, and is a game in the same vein as games like Moss, where you play in third person, controlling a character on screen from above, but you also have your own limbs in third person that you can use to aid them in, say, combat or traversal. It's exactly the same deal here, but with quite a few differences in the art direction, the tone, and the gameplay. Now, I haven't played all of Mixture. In the time I've had in the last week or so to play it, I put in about 2.5 hours, so I don't have an overview of the entire 8-hour campaign, but I will be delving into the gameplay mechanics that I've tried out and my overall impressions of the game from my first couple of hours, so let's get straight into it. The first thing we always start with are visuals. Now, on a visual level, Mixture looks pretty damn good. It seems like it's running at 90 Hz. It doesn't feel like reprojected, but it might just be that the camera angles are pretty static, so I don't notice it, but the game feels fairly smooth, and visually doesn't really feel like there's any ghosting. The textures on display here are a little bit bland, and a lot of the areas throughout the game do look quite similar in color tone and in terms of actual texture mapping, but the resolution is pretty damn good. Doesn't quite look as good as games like Moss, but it's almost there. And if you love the look of the game but we're waiting on the seal of approval for visuals on PSVR2, can confirm resolution wise, it looks pretty damn great. But what will you actually be doing in Mixture? Well, you play as an alchemist, essentially an all-powerful being that uses magic and alchemy that's been awoken from your slumber for quite a long time. You're awoken by a small knight. This knight is called Solar, the Moth Knight, and you are sort of polar opposites in the story. The character you play as and embody in first person is a bit of a malevolent evil spirit at the start of the game at least, and the knight that you're overlooking and controlling in third person is an agent of the light. So you have conflicting ideas for how to proceed in certain areas, and you're given a few dialogue options to explore the lore of the game and the story as you progress through, although not really many of these actually have impact on how the gameplay progresses. Most of the time they're just to kind of give you more information or more context in the story, but it is nice that there are dialogue options here. The story itself is fairly engaging and gets more interesting as you go, however it is bogged down by a fair bit of exposition. You are sat there kind of clicking along. It feels very much like Game Freak's Pokemon games where you're sitting there reading text boxes and dialogue. And while the exposition is extensive at points, it's kind of needed because this world is very different from our own, has a lot of its own ins and outs and inner workings, and it's necessary to understand who each of the knights are, what they're doing, and the lore of the alchemists as well. Now, as we tackle gameplay in terms of my first couple of hours, the easiest thing to talk about is probably the alchemy itself. Throughout your 8 to 10 hours of the campaign, you will unlock more alchemic spells essentially as you gather materials and mix them together to create different ones, and then you throw your little potions full of these mixtures, which either hit enemies or interactable objects around the map to solve puzzles or apply buffs or debuffs to your own characters or enemy characters. That's your role as your first-person entity, your alchemist, and it's really satisfying to do. You start off with just one mixture that you can make, and then as the game progresses, I think it progresses up to 6 spells and mixtures that you can use as you go. And as I said, each of them have their own combat uses, like some of them slow down enemies, some of them get enemies stuck or bring them to ground if they're flying. And then they also have uses outside of combat where they can make different areas of the map bouncy to allow you to progress, and so on and so forth. It's really cool seeing these abilities of the player character being usable in and out of combat. Speaking of combat, while you're in combat, you can either attack with alchemy, as I've just talked about, and you can either have aim assist on or off for this with your throwing, as you do have to throw these mixtures at enemies. And you also have the abilities of Solar, the small knight, to use against enemies too. Now, Solar only has a couple of attacks, but you can actually unlock more as the game progresses through currency that you find throughout your playthrough. But the main attacks are a big slash and a swing. You also have access to a dash, which also helps you out of combat as you traverse through puzzles. However, in combat, it's very useful to dart around enemies, and the combat here is actually fairly difficult at times. Some battles are incredibly hectic as you fight various enemies through different biomes, and you know when one's coming up because a magical wall basically pops up and blocks the path that you're meant to go through, letting you know that you're in for quite a big battle against various enemy types. I was a bit worried from the visual style of this game that enemies would become kind of muddy together and you wouldn't be able to tell them apart, but the enemies have very different designs and very different abilities. Some are melee focused, some have buffs where they make themselves invulnerable until you hit them with an alchemic spell, and some have stunning attacks. There's a lot to deal with here, and along with this you also have various boss battles throughout the game which follow more traditional boss battle formats where you have to dodge certain attacks and hit weak spots. It genuinely is quite a rewarding and strategic battle system, especially with quite a few enemies in the arena when you're using Solar to dart around and hit them with the right timing, while also throwing mixtures at different enemies to slow them down or to give them a debuff to help Solar fight them. Even though, as I said, Solar's combat abilities are a little limited in terms of what you can perform, the addition of the Alchemy here really spices up battle situations, and honestly, the gameplay that you're seeing here doesn't really do it justice. It feels a lot more exciting and hectic than it does on the flat screen here, and as you progress you get access to more and more alchemic mixtures, meaning that you can do a lot of different things in terms of combat. Out of combat though, as I said, mixtures can be used to traverse the environment too, which is really neat. The world is very big, and you have to use these mixtures to form pathways for Solar to traverse. It's a bit like Moss in this regard, where you are platforming around, and I didn't expect there to be so much platforming in this game, but there is. For the most part it works pretty well, and Solar can spread their wings, as they are the Moth Knight after all, and also use their dash to dive across large gaps. Sometimes though, Solar's traversal abilities are a little bit finicky to use, especially the glide. Sometimes it didn't really turn on when I wanted it to, but these issues are few and far between in my 2 and a bit hours of playtime, so you probably won't run into it too often. However, the positioning of the camera is something that I feel like needs another pass. You don't have free control of your first person view, you are transported around the map to different points of view. You can smooth turn or snap turn, but you don't actually get to decide your locomotion options because there are none. You're just plopped around the map to different points, and some of these are a little bit weird to crane your neck around to get good points of view in terms of watching a battle or looking at a platforming area, and I did find it a bit disorienting when the game would just kind of throw me somewhere new and I'd have to readjust and gather my POV to actually realize where I was and how to proceed. Overall though, Mixture is offering a lot of good stuff here. It's a really interesting idea that I feel has been built off the backs of games like Moss that have really pioneered this sort of genre, but Mixture adds its own twist to it with its bleak visual style that reminds me a little bit of the Light Brigade. I have been pretty entertained so far, and if you like the look of the gameplay on screen right now, you'll probably enjoy Mixture very much. And surprisingly, it is quite a large scale game that I really didn't expect it to be. Not only in visual presentation in terms of actual scale of objects and of cliffs around you, but in terms of the amount of content here and areas to explore. And for the price, I'd happily recommend it to anybody who enjoys this sort of combat and platformer loop. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Those have been my first thoughts on my first couple of hours of Mixture on PSVR2. Please let me know what you think of this game in the comments below. Thank you to our patrons, Luke Bentley, Ace Gamer, Hazit Mirza, and Phil Irving. If you want to join the Patreon or YouTube membership, the link's in the description, and so is the link to the Discord if you want to come and talk to me or anybody else that loves PSVR2. So thank you all for watching once again, and I hope to see you all in the next video.